Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Winning Mentality. My name is Daniel Cutright, and thrilled to have our guest on today, Rebekah Vepraskas. Rebekah, how are you?
Nice job on the pronunciation, Daniel. I'm awesome. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Doing great. It's June, great weather, and things are going awesome here. So appreciate you joining today once again. And Rebekah, for those folks that don't know your background, have worked for several years in your own private practice as a counselor, and also recently founded the company called Athlete Metal. Have worked with a lot of high-level athletes on peak performance, mindset, things like that. I actually got to hear you on a LinkedIn Live event that was hosted by Georgia Tech's Scheller College of Business, and just hearing some of the concepts you were talking about. I love this topic area, and so I was hoping we could dive into some of that today. Maybe what we'll do to start is if you just want to give a little of maybe your background, and then talk about Athlete Metal. What is Athlete Metal? What's the mission and focus there?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. I really appreciate it. So Athlete Metal is a dynamic platform where you decide what you want. So what we know is that 3% of all people have goals, and 1% of people write them down. And so Athlete Metal is a platform where you write down your long-term, short-term, and daily goals, and then post about how you're getting there. So, which is really cool. It's a private platform for teams. And so anybody can be a team. And so the idea is based on the needs of college level athletes. And that's where my research is based. It's really amazing. We're finishing up our beta testing now and launching teams now. And so it's been really a fun ride, and not what I thought I would be doing at all when I started out with my MBA.
That's awesome. And we'll definitely dive into some of the goal setting mindset here a little bit, but how did you get started with Athlete Metal? How did you get started even with your own private practice and going into business for yourself?
Well, you know what? To be honest with you, it starts with a sad story. And just to be completely transparent, I think a lot of post-traumatic growth is possible, and maybe we don't talk about it. So my brother, this ended his life in 2015. And I worked in an inpatient hospital setting that was for acute care patients. And so it was hard for me because all of my patients kind of reminded me of my brother. So I worked with a lot of addiction and suicidal ideation and things like that. And so it was very kind of traumatizing to go to work. And so it's sort of the coup de grace, or the goal of all counselors, is to hang a shingle, to be able to be in practice for yourself. And a small percentage of therapists are in practice for themselves. A lot of them work with organizations, and, it's not always easy to start your own company. And so I kind of wanted to always kind of just, it felt like a big dream. And so when I was sort of deciding what I wanted to do, I wanted to work with a younger population, and I wanted to work with college students. And so I launched Salient Counseling in 2016, about 12 months after my brother died. And it's just been amazing. And in Salient Counseling, I started working with, prominent clients, and we were working on sort of reverse engineering mental health. So for example, a lot of times when a therapist comes into a situation, the client, sort of downloads what's going on currently, and they problem solve like the problem at hand. Yeah. And that's not my approach. So my approach is a thorough assessment to sort of understand where the client is in the space and the context of their lives. And then beyond that, we talk about what all the stressors are and how do we turn every single stressor into a goal. And so thinking of stressors as opportunities. And so it's really cool because it takes away the stigma of mental health, and it really is about goal reaching. And so when I was working with one of my clients, he had a goal of going to Georgia Tech. And so I had like a 10-year-old dream of getting my MBA at Georgia Tech. And so I felt kind of hypocritical coaching him into this big goal of his that felt sort of impossible to him, and not also saying, I actually want to do that too. So it was amazing going back to school. There was one doctor, and I was a therapist, and there was a pharmacist in the program, but primarily MBA programs are made up of people in organizations, big companies, like for example, in our class, Coke, Apple, Google. So if you are somebody like me who's an entrepreneur, you're a bit of a unicorn. And as a social scientist, it was interesting for me to go into the program and just sort of notice all of the key trends. And so that's really what I was focusing on. So I was already working with some NFL families and in my private practice, and working with some CEOs. And so at the time, actually, one of the Georgia Tech players actually like had to tragically die, like had a brain aneurysm and died. And this was in the spring of 2019. And so I was listening to the interviews of his teammates and the interviews of his, the people in his position group. And they I could hear trauma, as they were talking about his death. And I was just, I was sort of, the approach I had was, if these guys are experiencing trauma, which they were, are they in an environment where they could ask for help? And if you come to particularly somebody that's in a hyper-masculine environment, like football, or any man really, if you come to him during a trauma and say, don't you need my help? No. If you have a relationship with that person and then you're checking on them, it's a completely different ballgame. Wow. And so the pilot program was designed to provide that safety net. So it was a voluntary program. We had 25 athletes and a really high participation rate in the freshman class that year. And we worked with them on, first of all, assessing them, and then goal setting and checking in with them once a month and kind of following up with them. And it was amazing to watch how they grew, and then also how they, you know this because you are a college athlete.
Yep.
College athletes or any athlete is so highly motivated and highly coachable. They're like, just give me a skill, Miss Rebekah. Like, I'll implement it. And so you would give them a skill and they would text you that night and say, like, I used that, it worked, And so for me, it was just the most fun I've ever had. And working with them. And gosh, I mean, I think so much of, particularly like college football players. I mean, they have so much stress, so many different variables, so many different constraints, and they have a lot on them with social media and their classes, and not to mention their sport is year-round, really, with training. And they're just really incredible young men.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, and I know you and I talked about this a little bit. I can relate to that perspective. I come from the unique, I guess, background of having competed Division III, but then working with Division I athletes. And it was like, you would see a lot of these kids that would come from high school athletes where maybe they just relied on talent, to then now all of a sudden they're in this super demanding, high pressure environment where they're, 6 a.m. lifts. And it's like everything outside of their class are revolving around that sport. And so learning how to deal with those pressures, they're being away from home, all those different things.
Well, and you're taking a hometown hero.
Yeah.
Who's the very best in his town, probably, likely. And then you're putting him in an environment where he's not the best, or he's, equal or about as good as everyone else in the room. If you're taking a hometown hero and putting him in a situation where he's highly stressed, who does the hometown hero go to for help? And who can he talk to that's not going to judge it? The guy that's gunning for his position,
Yeah.
the coach who's wondering if he's got what it takes. And so that was really an interesting thing to me, was if we could create some sort of a safety net where it felt natural to, like, let's go back, let's check in, like, let's recalibrate, it was really amazing because it did reduce a lot of the stigma, because it was just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to follow up.
Yeah. So it was like this built-in program. So they didn't feel like they were like, oh, this is just part of what we do now, but they
Right.
had that safe space. Cause I guess before you implemented this program, they really didn't have anything like that. Is that
Right, right. You would have to notice that you were having a problem, then signal to someone that you were having a problem, and then talk to a stranger
Hmm.
who is, somebody that is a therapist that worked with 550 other athletes in the program. And so, would you, if you were in the top 1 to 2% of all athletes, who is tougher than tough to be able to be in the top 1 or 2% of all athletes, would you, in that population, ever ask for help?
Yeah.
Ever say you had a broken, bone in your foot or whatever? Like, these guys are
Right.
tough. And so it's cool because we could eliminate any sort of risks or symptoms, or screen for everything, and then completely focus on what they wanted.
Hmm.
So my approach with them was, and still is, like, you're at this pinnacle of success. You're an NCAA D1 athlete. What do you want this to look like? Because a lot of times, they, even no matter what level of success you or I are at, we can't see the forest for the trees. You're where you are, and we can design this. What do we want it to look like?
Yeah.
And let's not go through life like this, in this robotic way where we just sort of take this experience for granted, because these guys don't know it. The 4 years that they're living through are, they're going to romanticize those 4 years for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
So doesn't it make sense to, like, take a step back and design it in a way that they feel proud of, they're intentional about? Yeah. So it's really cool.
Is it just I mean, do you feel like guys don't slow down, or girls slow down to do that and really evaluate what they want this to look like? Is it just because they're caught up in the day to day? They're just there and kind of following along with the patterns of the team, or like, what's the reason more people don't stop and really think about what they want?
That's a great question. So, I mean, culturally, I don't think we do that
Right.
as a culture, just broadly. And then in the culture of a D1 athlete or an NFL athlete, it's a bit like drinking out of a fire hose or a fire hydrant. I mean, I think there's so much coming at you, and you're just basically trying to keep up. And so there isn't a lot of time or space for that. And the interesting thing to me is that when we are able to set a goal, we're able to point the brain cognitively in the direction that we want it to go, and the brain responds. And so, this is not my quote, it's something I read somewhere, and I wish I knew who I could credit the quote to, but the brain is a goal-seeking missile. If you give the brain a target, even if you say, like, I'm going to spill something on this, you'll spill it.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that's how clear the brain, you tell the brain something and the brain does it. And so if we are highlighting what we want, it just makes sense, especially for these guys who have very, very big dreams. And to help support them and not see them sort of languishing, I think is so empowering to me as a therapist. And I just absolutely, I
Yeah.
love college football players
Yeah.
so much. Yeah, they're amazing.
No, I love that. And there's so many things that you're talking about that I want to dive in on. And we could go a million directions in this too. But when you're talking about, I love that, the brain being a goal seeking missile,
Yeah.
what are the methodologies or strategies that you use to now help program the brain? Is
Right.
is there visualization techniques? So you talked about writing down goals. Like what are those strategies for you to get these guys or athletes that you're working with to that point?
So there's several different strategies, and most of it starts and ends with mindset.
Yeah.
And so if your mindset is one of just continuing to move forward in the direction that you want to go, that isn't necessarily like, a positive mindset. That's not necessarily a neutral mindset. That's just a gritty mindset of like, I'm going to continue to keep going. And Dan Chambliss from Hamilton College did a research study about swimmers that make it to like the Olympic level. And he talked about just the ones that really do progress are the ones that just are okay with the mundane of like just continuing to practice. And 10,000 hours of anything that you do, you would be an expert in. And so just continuing to work and looking at all the different outliers that have had great success with any sport or in any arena, it is just about not giving up. And so that's really the most interesting thing to me. Also, like, with that, I talked about in the LinkedIn live talk for Georgia Tech, gratitude. So a lot of times your brain will go into a very negative mindset. We have 80,000 thoughts per day, around 80,000 that scientists believe. And because we have a negativity bias, almost everything we think is negative.
Wow.
Imagine that.
Wow.
I mean, that's incredible. And so would that impede your success? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so how do we walk that back? And so in all of the work that I do, it's really based on dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, which is a balance between two things. So it uses mindfulness practice, and also a dialectic is a balance. I didn't know that word, growing up, but a dialectic is a balance, and it's kind of a funny word. For example, the pandemic has been incredibly hard and an incredibly rich and valuable time in everyone's life.
Right.
It's been a refining time. So if we say the pandemic's been hard, but it's been, incredibly rich, then it erases the fact that it's been hard. Has it still been hard? Yes. So in so many parts of our lives, Daniel, we are living a dialectic. And so it really is about, two things can be true at the same time about any one thing. Like, playing at a D1 level is incredibly difficult and incredibly rewarding. Like, and we can focus on both, and just notice both. And then beyond that, always focus on the present moment, focus on what you can control, which is a lot. We control our commitment, our mindset, our words, our kindness, our screen time, our breath. We control so much of our day, and we focus on what we can't control. And again, that goes back to the negativity bias. And for most of the people I work with, we focus on something that already happened. So we focus on the past, and I always ask the question, well, what can we do about that now? And that really is applicable for athletes and high performers, because mistakes are made. When you're putting yourself out there, you're making mistakes, and letting it go, getting ready for the next opportunity is really important.
Totally. No, and I've found myself in the past too, like it can be really easy when you're very, and I don't want to call myself a high performer, right? But like when you're very meticulous and conscientious of the work that you do, you want to do it well. And so I'll find myself thinking about the one thing that didn't go as well as I thought it should. There's a podcast, or I guess an author, most people know the name John Gordon. He's written a number of, success books. But on his podcast, he's talked about in the morning, he will take a daily gratitude walk.
Yes.
And he uses that to think of all the things that he's thankful for, all the things that are going right in his life, to get his mind positioned the right way. You talked about focusing on the controllables, and so I think that goes hand in hand as well. Circumstances are going to happen in our lives all the time, no matter what,
Right.
and the circumstance is what it is. But to your point, if we can just choose to our response to that circumstance,
Right.
then that positions us in a better mindset to attract what it is that we actually want. It's like, when you wake up in the morning, if you say today's going to be terrible, then
Right.
today's probably going to be terrible. But if you wake up in the
Exactly.
morning and say today's going to be awesome, I get to go do this today versus I have to go do this today, you're going to
I,
attract whichever one of those that you're focused on.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And it's amazing to me. I couldn't agree with you more. And gratitude is a huge part of every day of my life. And it's interesting. It takes 12 positive thoughts to neutralize one negative thought. And
Wow.
so my goal is to write down at least 12 things a day. And I do this a lot with my clients. And it isn't about being grateful for shelter or grateful for, your mom or whatever. It is, but it's it is, and it's also about being grateful for the cough drop that's helping me have this, podcast right now because my throat hurts, or being grateful for the fact that I'm connected with you, or being grateful for the fact that this sparkling water is amazing right now. Being grateful for the like little micro tiny things that are happening right now helps neutralize, because if we're talking about things that we take for granted, which is shelter, that doesn't really neutralize a thought. And so it's more mindful if we think about like checking into this moment, grateful for the comfortable sweatshirt or whatever that I'm wearing today, or grateful that it's going to rain. And so those are the interesting things that we don't pay attention to. They're not sexy, they're not fun, to think about. How do I get my mindset? How do I really sharpen it? How do I prepare it? And even for us, when we're training, when we're very sore, even capturing that in a way of, oh wow, my muscles are telling me that I'm doing good, I'm working out, I'm doing, everything that you're thinking is, you getting toward further and further towards your goal. And how are you going to capture it?
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that. Absolutely. You were talking a little bit earlier about, and I wanted to hit on this point because I think it's relevant for a lot of people coming out of a pandemic, especially. But before you implemented this program at Georgia Tech, a lot of these guys maybe didn't have a place to go to, or didn't have somebody to confide in if they were feeling a certain way. In the pandemic, a lot of us have been socially isolated. A lot of companies realize that while there's a lot of benefits to remote working, one of the things that's been challenging is the lack of human interaction with one another. And I think that's something that people feel is a lack of community. How important is community, or just having people that you can be supported by for in our everyday lives?
Yes, I love that you asked that question. So social connection is a huge mood booster. And it's really important in terms of your support system to be checking in with your support system. A lot of times when you're feeling symptoms of depression, you are going to be more prone to isolation. And the pandemic has really lent itself to isolating. And some people who might have been prone to isolate are isolating even more. And so it's really interesting. There's a doctor at Duke University named Dr. Stephen Alardi, who wrote a book called The Depression Cure, and he talks about 6 different mood boosters, and they are the addition of omega-3s into your diet, like a mood boosting dose of omega-3s, which is kind of a lot of omega-3s, and it depends on the EPA portion of omega-3s. Vitamin D, which we haven't been getting as much of during the past year, during the pandemic. And outdoor light is 100 times brighter than indoor light. And so we've been indoors a lot on, on virtual classrooms or meetings. And then social connection is a mood booster, highlights, as well as healthy sleep habits, tips to reduce rumination or worry. And then he also talks about how exercise is a mood booster. So I always tell my clients, if you go on a walk with a friend outside, that's 3 mood boosters, and you're going to be feeling so much better when you come back. And so, yes, social connection is a huge deal. And even I love those 6 mood boosters if you think of being empowered for your own mental health, of like, these are 6 things that I can do to feel better. And so I love Dr. Alardi's work, and he has a clinic at Duke, and he sees patients there. And so I think that it's really interesting. So he talks about the efficacy of those 6 interventions as being as effective as medication. So, and when you do go on psychotropic meds, and some people need them, that's a bit of a dance, and you've got to figure out which one works for you. And so to empower clients to be able to, take the supplements if they choose to, and implement these mood boosters is really cool. And so I encourage everybody to do their own research. Dr. Alardi's book is really compelling, and he's done a lot of research that he outlines in his book, and kind of talking about those 6 ways to boost mood is really, really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all these different things we're talking about here, these all play into peak performance. And these are all things that a lot of these, it sounds like people can do these pretty much on their own, like day to day.
Totally. Yes. And so there, like we've talked about it, it's as effective for, any human being, really, like, let's implement these things. And so it's really amazing. And I think for parents, and for any individual to know what the sort of ways are to boost mood, and to be able to offer them is really amazing, and a really nice way to sort of redirect someone when they're having a tough time. Like, let's go for a walk, is such a great way to sort of improve mood, and also sort of take the reins back of how you're feeling, which is really awesome.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. When you were talking about, athlete metal and working with some of these athletes at Georgia Tech, I know you were talking to me about some of the visualization strategies, and when you mentioned earlier in the podcast, even creating that picture of like, what do you want out of this?
Yes.
You were telling me kind of a cool story about, maybe some of the athletes that you were working with and where you would do some of these sessions. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So that was such a dream. So when I was approved and going to work with the athletes at Georgia Tech, and there was nowhere to meet with them. And so they had said, well, you could rotate through the different athletic directors' offices. And if you're a therapist, you know that you need to meet in one place for it to be therapeutic for your clients, and for them to know kind of, this is the place I'm coming to for therapy. It can't like change. And they need to feel safe. So I asked Coach Collins, Coach Jeff Collins, who's the head coach of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. I asked him, is there a coat closet or anywhere that I can meet with these guys that's like, just one place where they can come and we're not rotating through a bunch of different rooms? And he said, what about a skybox? And I said, overlooking, and he goes, Bobby Dodd, and kind of threw his hands up like, and I was blown away. And so we did every session overlooking the field, and we would sit there in this, the seats that face the field, and conduct therapy there. And it was such a dream come true. And so we would do guided imagery, and I taught the players guided imagery and mindfulness practice there overlooking the field in Bobby Dodd. And it was such an amazing experience. Most of the players had never practiced mindfulness before, had never practiced guided imagery before. And your mind is so incredibly powerful. And at an elite level, a game is about 90% mental. And so to pay attention to the nuances of the mind, 3 deep breaths reorganizes the way the brain operates. Being able to take 3 deep breaths as you go out to your, to conduct your play and to, sort of center yourself is so important. And also, we worked on with every single player a vision statement. And so, what is the centering thing that you say to yourself to sort of help you relax, to help you get back in the zone, sort of remind yourself you've got this, And so it was so cool with every player to develop a vision statement and sort of a motto. And what we know is that all really successful athletes have a vision statement. And really successful coaches also have one, and it's very short, it's concise. And so it again is a way to recenter. And it sounds like it's almost sounds silly. So Alex Rodriguez, in the book Mind Gym, Gary Mack, who is a sports psychologist who's actually passed away a few years ago, but he wrote about how Alex Rodriguez used to say to himself every day, I hit the ball solid, I hit the ball solid, I hit the ball solid. He also said, my batting average is 380, my batting average is 380, my batting average is 380. And he would visualize 380 everywhere. And that was really effective for him. Tiger Woods, his motto is trust your stroke. And so we know that with a vision statement, if you say sort of second person, talk to yourself like you've got this, or trust your stroke instead versus I've got this, you would be less likely to believe I've got this.
Wow. Yeah. Versus
if you hear you've got this, because it sounds like someone else believes in you.
Yeah.
And so, those are all of there's so many different idiosyncrasies. And so sitting down with athletes and being able to sort of come through some of them and also work with them specifically on, their different idiosyncrasies and their different barriers to success was the thrill of my life.
Yeah. I love that we're talking about just how you choose your words too. And I think this is important because some people will hear this and again, it's important to note those idiosyncrasies because some people, let's say if they wanted to quit the habit of smoking, they might take that as, okay, well, I'm going to make my vision statement. I don't smoke. I don't smoke. When in reality, the I don't smoke, you're still focusing on being a smoker, right?
Bravo. That's exactly right. And so anytime you're saying to yourself, don't, right, the brain doesn't hear don't. The brain hears the thing that you're telling it to do. The brain hears the verb, the action. And so it's interesting to me, when I work with my clients, I need to not be negative. And so, okay, like let's turn that around a little bit. How can we make that a positive statement that you're actually going to buy into? And also, we don't want to tell the brain and we don't want to tell ourselves, you're wrong. Like, how can you motivate yourself to do what's beneficial for you? And so I think that's so cool. And it's so inspiring to me. It's so fun, and really this all goes back to a growth mindset, of this Carolyn Dweck, who wrote about really just, letting go of a fixed mindset. Because a lot of times we'll start talking about a problem we have. And for example, if I said, I'm a really horrible dresser and I really hate the way I look. And then I start, telling you about a problem I'm having. I started the problem with this completely judgy attitude that was so fixed. Where do I go from there? And so really curiosity is a value. Yeah. And, not asking why, asking what makes me feel this way, what's going on for me in this situation. And it really is sort of a pre-contemplation almost, and it doesn't feel as binary or as black and white, more just curious about how can I recalibrate this a little bit toward my success.
Yeah, no, that's so good. There's so many directions we could go on this, and I know we're getting close to being into time too, but just on the idea of visualization. I want to hit on that really quick, and meditating. And I think sometimes people hear that or they think about that, and we're just so fast paced that a lot of times we just don't slow down to do it. But like, what is a practical way that somebody could incorporate that maybe into their day, of just like taking some time to like reset, refocus, center themselves? Is it best to do that in the morning? When's, what does that look like?
That's it. I'm so glad you asked that. So what I recommend to my clients, so you're right, it is hard to sort of stop everything you're doing and like
Yeah.
meditate, and it's stigmatized in a way too, and so people really wonder if it actually helps. And what actually helps, if I have a second to say what actually helps about meditation, is that if we can intentionally focus our thoughts, focus the mind for a moment, when we're calm, we're going to be able to better focus our mind and pay attention to how we're directing our brain when we're not calm. So when you feel stress, you'll be able to recalibrate and calm down. And so that's why it's really important. So the best way to fold it in, so a couple of things. One, for all of my clients, I recommend an app called Smiling Mind. It was developed by mental health care workers in Australia and for children, actually, and they've actually revamped it for all ages. And I love it because there's a little bit of novelty to listening to an Australian accent. It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of like Crocodile Dundee. I'm aging myself.
No, love those
And
movies.
yeah. So you actually can hear a voice that sounds a little bit different than your own, guide you through meditation, and you can actually pick modules of different age ranges. And it's a wonderful app. They have different sleep modules that you can turn on, and there's one that's like the ocean or whatever. And I always think I'm not going to fall asleep, and that's usually the last thought I have before I do fall asleep. So folding in mindfulness or meditation first thing in the morning when you wake up, or last thing at night if you're new to meditation, that's a great way to fold it in, because there are moments where you're still anyhow.
Yeah.
So in the morning, if you don't want to do an app, you can put your hand on your heart and feel your pulse and check in with your breath. And I start the day with daily affirmations. Just, Rebekah, you're worthy, you are ready, this is going to be a great day. And why that's important is because we have a scarcity mindset, and we are going to be looking at the day as, what we don't have. And so if we can't, and we look at with a sort of a negativity bias. And so, we wake up and think I didn't sleep long enough, or, all these different things. And so this idea of checking in with yourself and talking to yourself about what your day is going to be like is a great way to gear your day to be the day that you want it to be. So breathing, when you first wake up in the morning, is awesome. You could take like 20 deep breaths, or do some box breathing, where you do 4 seconds where you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, and then do that 4 times, and it makes kind of a box, and you can trace a box on your leg or on your hand. So the other thing is taking deep breaths at night before you go to bed, because if we're breathing at night before we go to bed, then we're able to slow the brain down, relax, let go of the day. And so one thing that I challenge my clients and everybody in my family with is 50 deep breaths. So if you're taking 50 deep breaths, you're going to fall asleep before you get to the 50th one. And if you don't, slow down, start over. Rebekah, I went too fast. Rebekah, start over, and take 50 deep breaths. And it's a great way to focus the brain and be mindful of the present moment. Because a lot of times we're looking way ahead into the future. We're looking way back behind us, and we're ignoring our current reality. So if you're living 3 realities at one time, whether you're on a field or whether you're in the C-suite or whether you're in therapy, if you're living 3 realities at one time, are you going to be calm?
Mm.
Are you going to be relaxed? Are you going to be living your best life? Probably not. Are you going to be performing at the level that you'd like to perform? Probably not. So letting go of the things that we can't control, focusing on the present moment and focusing on what we can control is a lot.
Yeah.
And it's such a great thing to sort of sink your teeth into.
I love how you phrase that too, of practicing mindfulness, because just like in sports, right? You go to practice to work on the fundamentals so that they show up in the game. It's the same thing. Like if you're taking that time to practice mindfulness in the morning, then when you're in those 3 different realities at the same time, the practice takes over, the fundamentals start kicking in, and your body reverts to what it's used to, right?
Exactly. And you can notice it. And you can
Yeah.
notice it. So the athletic director for the medical athletic director at Georgia Tech, the whole time I was there, was like, Rebekah, how do we automate this? How do we make this where we can offer it to more players and athletes? And how do we make this where we can help more people at one time? And so for the last year, I've been working with a team to code and create a goal reaching platform for teams. And so that's really the beauty of Athlete Metal, is that goals is something that nobody's ever really tried to automate and really try to put in the hands of users. And so I'm really excited about that, and excited about sort of a silo of serotonin where a team can, on their profile have what their goals are, and then start to post about ways that they're boosting their mood and ways that they are reaching their goals, on and off the field, their personal goals as well. So it's really, really empowering and a great way to communicate and sort of eliminate a lot of those feelings of isolation that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And have you rolled this platform out for some of these athletes yet?
Yes, I have. And so it's going really well. And it's a great way for coaches to motivate their players,
Yeah.
and for all the nutrition staff and the strength staff and the tutors and different things to encourage and support, and for the players to sort of take what's unseen about the daily grind of a college athlete and make it seen.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we may not do the thing we know we need to do because it doesn't feel like it matters. And so if we're bringing meaning to the mundane that it takes to be successful, it's all those sort of micro successes that we string together to really accomplish. Because there isn't one big day. Every day is a big day.
Right. Yeah. And so it's starting with that big picture of, okay, here's what I want. Here's what I want out of this. And then working backwards, reverse engineering to say, okay, now what does that need to look like on day to day? And then that gives them the excitement that when they show up, they understand what they're working towards.
Right. It's a connection and a reinforcement. It goes back to being in the zone. And so, Nick highlight to see me higher, the psychologist that wrote about sort of the idea of being in the zone, or being sort of able to be in a state of flow, is all based on goals. And so how do we actually get into a state of flow? Well, first we have to know what we want. And so Michael Jordan talked about being in a state of flow when he would, put just an unreal amount of points up on the board. He would decide what he wanted and just go do it. And so it would help him sort of get into the zone or get into a state of flow. And so it's interesting if we can actually put that in the hand of users for them to maximize their opportunity, maximize their motivation, maximize the mundane. I think it's really just so cool. So amazing.
I love that you're automating this too, because I think that so many people, they've spent their whole lives having not established these different habits to create these, different ways of thinking towards peak performance. And so if they have something tangible that
Right.
reminds them to do these certain things over time, that's, you know, that's how habits become formed. And so
Right.
then
Right.
you
Right.
start creating those habits and those pathways that now your mind reverts to the positive versus the negative, and you start to position yourself better for peak performance. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it really is awesome. And it's interesting because a lot of times we think of really great success as trying harder,
Hmm.
digging in, trying harder. And when we try too hard, a lot of times it's too much.
Yeah.
And so it isn't about trying harder, because that puts a lot of stress on us and we may flub, the big thing that we're trying to do. It's about consistency. It's literally just about not giving up. And
Wow.
so also being all together. And so we know that in groups of 150 or less, when goals are shared, there is something amazing that happens in a group, where a group can sort of function as one, sort of long body. And if and there's more buy-ins with teams that are like 150 or less. So it's actually perfect for all of us, and it really important. And it's interesting to me because social media has never really been positive before, or about you maximizing what you want out of an opportunity. And so I think that's a really cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah,
So
that's so cool. I know this is geared towards athletes right now, but do you ever see this getting scaled out to where pretty much anybody could use it?
So I've been in contact with some special operations officers who are interested in, post-military.
Yeah.
There's also like an isolation factor with platoons who are split up and going, trying to reacclimate into civilian life. And so I've wanted to create a way, I would say, since I was, a teenager, of veterans being able to be more supported and more together, because I have a close friend who's a Vietnam veteran and really struggled tremendously with PTSD. And before I went back to school to be a therapist, I've always thought, how could we help more? How could we provide more support? And I think that's probably our next foray. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. And I think that the possibilities are really limitless, and I'm stoked.
That's so awesome. Rebekah, this was amazing. I feel like I want to have you back on for probably more episodes, because
Let's do it.
there's so many topics that are still going through my head that you touched on, and I was like, we could do a whole episode on that, the scarcity versus abundance mentality, all those things.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
so yeah, I just want to say thanks again for jumping on. This was amazing. Really honored to have you on the podcast here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Awesome. Well, have a great weekend. And yeah, everybody take care. And don't forget to rate, like, share, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you're listening to this. Really appreciate the feedback. All right. Take care, everyone.